Hi, everyone. Welcome to Off the Rak, conversations on transformative leadership with yours truly, Walt Rakowich. As many of you know, in my former life, I was Chief Executive Officer of Prologis, and since then, the author of Transfluence, a book about the opportunity that we all have to make a transformative influence in the lives of those that we lead. And if you've been following my Off the Rak series, it's great to be reconnected with you. And if you're new, I'm really just happy to have you here. On a monthly basis, I host conversations with some of the most thoughtful voices, guiding leaders to be more human and more influential in the workplace. And if you're interested in checking out previous episodes, there's a link below so that you can become more familiar with me and more familiar with some of the guests that I've had on this series. And so today I'm thrilled to have Heather Younger with me. Heather is a three-time author, a speaker and CEO and founder of Employee Fanatix, a leading employee engagement and leadership development consulting firm. She's also a former lawyer, which makes all of this even more fun. And she's here in Colorado with me too, which adds a little bit of icing to the cake. And so Heather is on a mission to help leaders be more active listeners and also to understand the power that they possess to make people really feel valued in the workplace. And so listen closely, be an active listener, because I think that you're going to learn a lot from Heather today. Heather, it is really, really great to have you on today.
I am just super thrilled to be here with you. I cannot wait to see what we uncover.
Well, I can't either. And so, but Heather, before we dive into our conversation today, I understand that you're a mother of 3 teenage boys and 1 girl. And so I have to ask you, when you're around them and they're being monsters, as kids will be, are you really a caring and compassionate leader? Or do you revert to command and control like people like me do?
I'm like a mix. There's some times where I'm absolutely command and control, and then there's some times where I'm like, wait, one person at a time, one person. So there's times where I'm just like, you know what? I'm not going to win here if I try to answer all of them or try to solve a problem for all of them all at once. I have to break it down by one bite at a time. So I have to have one kid talk, the other one shush, and another one talk and the other one shush, and just kind of get to the information that way. That way I am at least seeking in a way that gets me to the truth of what they need from me in that moment. So
you're a little bit of command and control, but you do listen.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, God bless you with 3 sons. I tell you that I only have 1 of them, and I can't imagine if I magnified that by 3, what that would be like.
It's crazy. I'm telling you, I was losing hair at rapid speed, and grays, you can't see them, but grays are really coming in.
All right. Well, anyway, great to have you on again. So you're the author of 3 books. In your first book, you wrote about employee loyalty. Your second was about becoming a caring leader or becoming caring leaders. And your third most recent book was about the art of active listening, which I recently read and very much enjoyed. Right here, the art of active listening. Those of you who really need to pick this up. And I got to tell you, even my wife now is happy that I've read your book, because I'm working on some of your recommendations, just so you know, become a little bit of a listener. And so
I love that.
But I just want to ask you a question. Just looking back on all 3 of the books, can you tell our audience first of all, what inspires you, and what is it that, why is it that you decided to write these books?
Let's see. Well, let's see that the first one on the 7 intuitive laws of employee loyalty. I have to be honest, the catalyst for every single one of these was being around the opposite of what I'd like the world to be. So it'd be like either being reporting to someone or being in an environment where it was the opposite of what I wanted the world to be. And so I'm a person who truly believes that we have to be the change that we're seeking. And so each time I add on another piece of content, another service line. It's always saying, okay, I'm at a high level of frustration right now, and I know the right way to do this. I need to be I can't be stuck in the muck, meaning I can't stay put. I have to also evolve and change, and I want to help others do the same. And so that's the reason why I decided to write the different books I have, is each time I maybe was at a inflection point of maybe frustration or an awareness or an aha that said, okay, time to teach more. And that's how it all comes together for me.
Yeah. Well, was there a moment in your early career that kind of sparked this thought that, things aren't working, we need to lead employees in a different way? I mean, was there kind of a seminal moment for you? For
Well, I
me,
mean,
but just so you know, for me, it was 2008, the crisis. Just when it hit me, I realized that, how buried we were as a society and as an individual, and I felt like I had to change. But I'm kind of curious, was there a seminal moment for you where
yeah,
you
I mean,
saw that same thing?
I can think like probably about, if I look back now, there were breadcrumbs all around me as it related to customer experience, employee experience, and our failure to listen to the stakeholders who really drive the business forward, any business forward. So I would say like the breadcrumbs are there. Probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I was working at an organization and I took the job. There was going to be a merger of 4 or 5 companies, and I knew there'd potentially be a layoff at some point. But they started to do like really crazy moves, and they were bringing in these super high paid, I'm not going to say the brand, but let's just say people who worked at a very big brand into this company that was a smaller brand. And those people had no desire to like seek to understand what the customer needed when we were trying to go through new product rollouts. And they didn't have it they really weren't focused on employees and how they were feeling about all the change and the mistrust. And so people started to come to me inside that environment, and because I'd already acted like a cultural ambassador, uplifting people, whether they're on my team or not. And they would come to me and they'd be like, what is happening? Like, I don't even know. Like, no one's sharing, no one's talking. Like, this person came on, they're hiring all these people. Are they going to replace us? They just had all these questions in their mind, and no one was like talking about anything. No one was communicating anything. So it made everybody start to really like have this mistrust there. Anxiety was there. So I went to the head of HR because I was feeling it. I was feeling it hard. It was coming down on me. It was bearing down. And I went to the head of HR and I said, we got to do something about our engagement, our culture. And she said, you're right. You should go do something about that. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, I'm leading customer experience. I'm not in HR. Why the heck do I have to go lead this? And it was because I'd already acted in that way. I acted in that way without having a title, right? I just did that. And so I decided, okay, let me go. If she wants me to do it, I'm gonna go do it. I'm gonna go. So I created an employee engagement council, and I invited people from all the companies who had already expressed like anxiety, but also a desire to see something positive come out of the merger. And we started to come around the table. How do we break down the walls of mistrust? How do we get rid of some of the silos and make people who just have like a new title that comes in turn into an actual person who comes in and connect the people? So we started to do different types of activities to break down those walls. And it kind of didn't matter. I mean, it mattered to a certain extent. We saw things change. We saw the trust start to like build between people who didn't know each other when they were fearful before. But at the same time, the merger didn't do well because they still hadn't at a above organization level talked to the customers about this and asked what their opinions were. They hadn't involved the people on the front line enough. And so it was an aha for me. There were about 200 people laid off in that first round. I was one of them. And it was a huge aha. I mean, I'd never been laid off before. That was a painful process. But I realized in the moment that was the gap. The gap was that the organizational leaders weren't taking the time to pulse and figure out what the next steps were for all of the other people, like this key stakeholders. Again, talking about customers, you're trying to roll out this brand new product. Do they even want it? If they do, how do they want it? And they weren't asking about the people on the front line who actually knew best what should be done. And someone had to do that. So I became that kind of person. Everything we did at Employee, it was Customer Fanatix at that time, where we really focused on customer and employee experience. And in the last couple of years, we've changed it to Employee Fanatix, really focusing internal on culture and leadership, because we believe that's the crux of all the things. And that's where I'm at today.
By the way, just as an aside to that, without mentioning names, did the merger ever really work out?
No. Nope. It did not. No, they had they had hundreds of people laid off, and the products that the reason why they decided to do the merger and bring this particular company in, it didn't work. The customers at the original company that had been in business for 25 years, it was not a tech company. All these other people, the companies that came around it were tech. They were trying to onboard, trying to create this, trying to take the tool and turn it into this digital tech type thing. It just wasn't working. The customers didn't want it. They wanted what they wanted. And so no, they lost a lot of customers. It was just not great. So and that's been since I left. This is all I'm seeing, all the fallout and hearing all these things from the people involved in it. So no.
One of the big reasons is people just didn't listen. They didn't listen. They didn't ask.
They didn't ask. They didn't seek. They didn't recognize what was happening around them. This is where we go into that cycle of active listening. They didn't do it. And so ever since then, I mean, before that, I was already working through this model, but I didn't really realize it was a formal model. I was just doing it in the customer experience space. And after this place, I started to realize, wait a second, everything I did there that made relationships successful, increasing wallet share with larger customers, keeping customers who are going to leave us from walking through this. I said, wait, we can do the same thing with employees. And so we started to just walk through that same thing, helping organizations go through the process this way, and it works.
So let's leverage off of that just a little bit. One of your core philosophies is the notion that when leaders practice active listening, others feel heard, and they feel valued. And it creates a culture that ultimately prioritizes people. So can you talk a little bit about active listening? I mean, I really, really did love your book, and there aren't many people that write about listening. And frankly, it is a problem that many leaders, including myself, had. I'll be honest. And so what are some of the steps that leaders can take to practice active listening, become better active listeners? And I know that may be a little bit of a loaded question, because there's probably a lot to it. So you can address it however you want, but kind of some basic steps that we can all take.
One thing I would say overarchingly is that active listening, if we think about like a plus and a minus, active listening is the difference between thinking we know what someone wants and knowing what they want. And this is massive. It really is massive as we think about even like rolling out into the market with new products, thinking about like new product processes or change management inside of organizations. We are guessing, we are assuming. There is a variable in between the guessing and knowing, and that is active listening. So that's the overarching thing that I want people who are listening to understand that. And the other thing is we have super oversimplified what listening is. And I'm not trying to overcomplicate it, but you have to understand that we're not doing it right because we have oversimplified it so much that people don't feel heard. They're like, huh, what happened? So I would say for leaders, if you can't do like one thing well, it's going to be to make sure that you open your eyes and pause more. When you walk into your environments, when you walk through your halls or you enter into Zoom meetings or team meetings or whatever it is, pause more, talk less, talk last, watch what's happening on the screen, watch what's happening inside of an environment with you on the outside of it. Watch what happens when you enter the environment after. What is the difference in that environment? I would say the recognizing what's not being said is probably the most critical place for people, for leaders, and especially at the executive level to be starting, because what happens is they come in and there's all these initiatives, or they may be like trying to kind of prove themselves, the board, what they're not doing in most cases is they'll go, okay, well, we'll do like town halls and we'll do like maybe a couple like listening rounds or something. We'll get some stuff, but they're not really going deep enough to get to the crux of the matter. So the listening has to be longer and deeper. It has to be uncomfortable. It can't be surface. And you got to ask hard questions. You might not know the answer to it, and you may not be prepared to get what you get, but you have to go there because you got to get to the truth, because you won't ever roll out the product that needs to be on the market. You won't ever get the change that's going to be sustainable if you don't get to the truth of what people need in the moment. And you got to go deep, because customers want the feeling heard, feeling understood, feeling valued, not like a number. It's the same for all stakeholders. That's going to be like an executive to a board. That's going to be people that are in that are dealing with like outside partners, like vendors. That's going to be with them. It's anybody that needs to talk to you, like needs to know or get something from you in the organization. They're going to need you to land on their truth. Otherwise, you're solving for your truth, not theirs.
Yeah. So,
right.
Okay, so you in your book, you break it down into 5 areas, and I want to get back to that last thing you said. But you say first you got to recognize the unsaid. You got to seek to understand. You got to decode what's being said, and you got to act on it, and then you have to close the loop. But what I'm hearing you say is that maybe the hardest part that we all have in the first place is recognizing the unsaid and seeking to really understand the truth. I mean, sort of is the first part of it where are we weak at all of those things, or are we most weak at the first couple of those things?
That's a really hard one. I wish I could say a cookie. Like I would say this, that most of us don't decode or close the loop. So the things that we don't do the most are decode and close the loop. But I would have to say to start with, there's either a lack of awareness, so that social awareness of what's happening in the environment. That's kind of what the recognize the unsaid is. It's like social awareness. What's happening there? What are the cues, their nonverbal things that are taking place? What are the blind spots that are there you're not noticing, or you're noticing and you're choosing to ignore them? Those are the things that you have to get to. I know with pretty much with all the companies that my firm has worked with, in most cases, the only reason they get to us because they recognized there's something not quite right. And then they go, but I don't have any, like, I think there's some, I don't know exactly what it is, or I kind of know what it is, but I don't have any clue what to do about it. But they're kind of like they're sensing something. And that's smart. They have to be there first before they can realize to have any change is needed. Right. And so, but it's that taking the time to say, or I see it. Am I prepared to do anything about it? Because I have like 5 other change initiatives, or we are going down the road on this new product rollout or whatever it is, this new initiative, and we are not stopping. This bus is not stopping. I don't care what I notice.
Yeah.
And so when we know that, right, we're not primed for change. If we see something that's going off the rails and we already know in our heads, we are not going to do anything about it. Don't enter this cycle of don't go here, because you will lose all credibility, and your teams internally will lose all credibility if you know that you are going to do nothing about a thing and you attempt to go seek to understand the thing.
Right.
So it's just, don't even enter it. Don't even try to do this, because you want to go into listening, into the seeking phase, into all these phases. You need to know that there's going to have to be some type of change, some type of action, and you don't need to act on everything.
Right.
Okay, so that's not, I always say, like, when I say action, it doesn't mean you act on every piece of feedback. That's not what I'm saying. That would not be realistic at all. So for those who are listening, I want you to take strategic action. I want you to think about what you already have going on that you intended to act on, and maybe the feedback you receive just hastens it, makes the need for it something that you have to have. But you won't have sustainable change unless you have an awareness of it, you have a desire to change it, and then you have that like longevity, that like sustainability, that kind of stamina to see the change through. Otherwise, it's going to be one and done. You're going to do it once and you're going to be like, oh, patting yourself in the back, and people might be like, that's a little impressive. But they're going to expect that the other shoe is going to drop and you are going to fail all day. Right. So you've got to have that desire to want to go deeper and desire to see it through for the long haul, for people to know, like, I feel hurt. Like, these people really care about me. These people really want to know what my opinion is. And I feel like a valued member of the team because of it.
And listening is not just important for leaders, right? It's important for everybody. So, okay, how do you navigate a conversation where one party is practicing active listening and the other isn't? Like maybe you think you're listening and your boss isn't.
Yes.
How do you navigate through that?
I get this a lot, by the way. Well, this question I get a lot. And I would say there's 2 things. There's only really one person you can control, and that is you. You can influence others by your behavior, kind of how you act or how you respond in a moment, but you can only control you. So first start off with you and make sure you just gauge whether you are listening in this like real circular, cyclical way that I will describe here in a little bit. Not just leaning in, but there's also this leading with inquiry. And that's the second thing I would say, that as the person on the other end, you're perceiving they're not really hearing you, you can just lead with questions, lead with curiosity instead. Because if we lead with curiosity, we take ourselves out of what we call the baby brain, that fight or flight mode, and we put ourselves in the prefrontal cortex that allows us to be more objective in the moment, and we can start to really seek their truth or seek or understand why they're differing with us or why they may not be seeing our point. So we can kind of force them into a question answer. We can force them into it so that we're getting it. Maybe they start asking us questions back. So we can have them emulate us by just doing the right thing. So starting with us first is the most important. Understanding what questions we should be asking, feeling comfortable enough to ask the ones we don't necessarily know the answers to. So like, I'm trained as a lawyer, so they tell you never to ask the question you don't know the answer to. I would say the opposite. I'd say be prepared to hear the hard things, the things you don't know, because it's the only way you can get to the truth that you need to know in order to move you to the next step of whatever you're trying to get done. So all the outcomes, doesn't mean it's just leadership. You're right. Any outcome you're trying to get to, you're going to get there, but you got to lean in with that kind of really curious, really like, I'm hearing you with my heart. I'm hearing you with my eyes. I'm hearing you. I'm not just hearing you with my ears.
Right. It's more than that, isn't it?
People like to be seen. They really want you to see them. It doesn't cost a thing. It just costs your time and attention. They just want you to see them in their pain, see them in their curiousness, see them in their anxiety and their uncomfortableness. They just want you to see them. And when they know that, sometimes that's all you got to do. You don't have to do anything else sometimes.
Yeah. I hear you. Well, I hear you literally. All right, so let's switch gears here just a little bit, because you also wrote a book about caring. And so in addition to active listening, which I think is a lot about caring too, but you're a big believer in creating cultures that care.
Yeah.
And by the way, that resonates with me very deeply. During my time at Prologis, we were in the midst of a turnaround. And so we desperately needed people to listen and understand each other for the company to be successful, quite frankly. And so in your experience, what are some of the key steps that leaders can take to create a culture where employees feel cared for and valued? I understand listening is part of that. But bigger picture, I mean, are there certain steps that a leader can take?
Yeah, I mean, there are 9 behaviors I outlined in that book after doing, at that point, I think I interviewed about 80 different leaders from different industries. And at that point, I'd already read maybe 30,000 employee surveys and facilitated hundreds of focus groups. And I would say, I was able to synthesize what the behaviors were. What I found up to that point is that care was super nebulous, super squishy. People would say they don't care for me. People would say they care for me, or I don't feel cared for. And people would be like guessing what that was. So I needed to put some guardrails around what that was. I wanted to make it real. So listening is a big one, but there's this idea of creating a safe space for people, like psychological safety. That's one of them, where people feel comfortable enough to speak their truth and pipe up and be a dissenting opinion and not be ridiculed. There's this idea of self-leadership, which that has been one thing that I've always lived it. I had to, because of coming out of kind of an adverse background. But the idea of like leading ourselves with integrity, with congruence, with like making sure that we took care of ourselves from a self-care perspective, making sure that we skilled ourselves up to learn more and be more for others was a huge one. And that's the first element and the biggest element of caring leadership. Making them feel important, which is, involves kind of recognition and connection, taking time to be with our people, whether like in the trenches, spontaneously planned, one-on-one meetings, that kind of thing. So really making them feel important was another one. Helping them build resilience. And that's, something that really has been at the forefront of these last few years, of course, as we think about people going through just questioning what's happening in our political system, the racial stuff that's happening. Then you get COVID, and then you get the recession. How do you help your people kind of strengthen themselves, at the same time strengthen yourself? How do you fortify yourself against all the crazy stuff that's happening, and show them that you're there with them in their corner? So that's a big part of it, is kind of helping them build resilience. Empowering them, looking for the greatness in them. So there's all these different components that I was able to pull out that say, like, if you can do these things, and the more you can do these things, and the more frequently and consistently you can do these things, the more people will feel cared for. And then when I did this last book on active listening, it was my attempt, kind of in the first book, I did the same thing. I had 7 laws, and the first law was give them good supportive managers. And the second book on caring leadership was like my way of defining what supportive managers look like. And then that third book on active listening was a drill down into the work I've been doing for years now on listening organizationally, both the customers and employees, and realizing that same model can apply on one-on-one as well, which is why you're right, Walt, like the active listening is for everybody. And so I love the fact that as we think of caring leadership, I am opening up what that word leader means a lot more now, because I feel like when you say the word leader, you immediately uninvite other people to the party. And I disagree. So my whole kind of mission is to let people know how they are included in the need to show more care in their own shoes, not just like their manager is the only one who has to do that. Their CEO is the only one who needs to do that. That everybody's invited in to this caring ecosystem, and it's up to all of us to be those people.
I agree. And I think in large, I tell people all the time that, I mean, we're all leaders. You might not feel like you're a leader on the org chart, but the fact of the matter is that you're a leader in everything you do. And certainly when you leave the workplace, you're definitely a leader around all your friends and people that are around you. So many of these things not just relate to things that we do in the workplace, but we do outside of the workplace as well.
Exactly.
So I want to ask you a question though, because we're all struggling with the hybrid work environment, remote work environment that we're in today. So, is it harder to be a caring leader today? Is it harder to be an active listener today? Given where we are in this remote environment, and are the steps the same, or do they look a little bit different than they would if we were there day to day with people?
Yeah. So we just launched a study that's going to be coming out right, probably in a couple of months as far as like the results from it. And it's focused on listening in a hybrid and remote workplace, and also belonging and loneliness and connectedness and stuff as it relates to hybrid. So
Yeah.
I'll be able to give you, even more data points after that study is done and rolled out. I would say this though, that the only thing that hard is, I would not use that word. I would say that we just need to be more intentional. So I've had a remote workforce for the last 7 years. And I think that the biggest thing is, do I take time out? It's the same question I would ask you if you were in an office though. Am I taking time out to be with my people, my direct reports, is frequently? So, I would try to say weekly. Sometimes that's not possible, but trying to meet with them as frequently as you can, one-on-one, and once a month, maybe in a team environment. Asking them, again, the hard questions, trying to get them to pull things out in them as much as you can, get them comfortable, asking them things about their, just like, how are they at home? And like, how are the kids? Like, if you know things about their background. One thing I think that happened during the pandemic and us seeing people when we were all at home in our natural environments, where we could see like, children walking by, or people put the teams on, but you could still see like a hand coming into the picture, a dog or a cat popping on the screen, right? And we learned a lot by what we saw if we were paying attention. If we were paying attention, if we were fully present, we noticed a lot. And so I would say not to lose what we learned, but to use what we learned. Through that, what we saw about, we knew there was an aging parent at home. We knew a child was home for college, because then it's a jumping off point we have for them. As we meet with them one-on-one, we can ask about the kid in school. We can ask about their aging parent. We can ask if there's a way for us to help. All of those things allows us to continue to have the connectedness that you may think we're missing when we don't see them in the office. But you just got to go deep, and you've got to be consistent, and you have to be intentional.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that word, intentional. So you're aware of the fact that you're remote, and so what do I need to do to make it better, given that environment? I think that's absolutely right.
No excuses.
Yeah,
Don't make excuses.
No excuses. So we've got a number of young professionals that watch this show, and so I'm curious, what advice would you give to professionals watching today that are perhaps entering a leadership role? As I say, they're always leaders, but people lead more and more as they get a little bit older, and leaders that are hoping to be a positive influence on the company culture down the road. I mean, are there certain things you might advise them to do?
I would say the first is to lead yourself first. Worry about you first. We spend a whole lot of time worrying about other people around us and what they're not doing and what's not happening. And the very first thing I would say is focus on you. So do a lot of the inner work required, the self-awareness stuff, figure out, what your biases are and how they impact your workplace, and just you, you can control you most and influence you most. That's the first thing. I would say the second thing is to lead with curiosity as much as you can. I mean, go into, instead of always like being just feeling defensive about what someone might be saying, think about why they're saying it. And don't try to always come to the point where you have to agree with someone. Come to the point where you can understand someone, because that whole idea of when you're seeking, seeking to understand really is this idea of leaning in, removing your filter as much as you can, and trying to figure out what's happening with the other person. If you can empathize with them, which is really just kind of sensing the needs of another person, the feelings of another person. If you can, try to sense it. It doesn't mean you have to, it's not like you lived the experience and you're saying, oh, I know how that feels and I live the experience. It could be, I don't have any clue what this experience is, but I do want to try to understand your experience. So that leaning in to understand someone's experience is more important than saying, I have to reach agreement with you.
Mhm.
We think we're okay. People need to get comfortable with saying, we don't agree, but I think I'm getting you.
Mhm.
Because when someone starts to get me, now I'm going to be more open to tell them more of my truth. Now I'm going to be more welcome to compromise. The conflict does dissipate because I see the person's trying to get me.
Yeah.
If they come into it and all they're trying to do is get something from me, but they're not trying to get me,
Mhm.
it's going to set me off.
Yeah, and you don't trust them.
You don't trust them.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. I think that's great. I love that lead with curiosity too. Um, so Heather, last question for you today. First of all, I really appreciate you being on. But I asked all of my guests this question, and it's interesting some of the answers that I get. But so you've given us a lot to think about in terms of becoming better listeners, creating a more caring work environment, et cetera. But I've found that attitude matters a lot. And I think having an attitude of gratitude makes people better at what they do. And so I want to ask you, Heather, what are you most grateful for in your life?
I'd probably have to say my husband, because without my husband, I wouldn't have my children. So I would have to say probably my husband. Right? I mean, I have a very fruitful, full life with the 4 children and my husband. And so I think I would say my husband. Yeah, that's who I'm most grateful for. Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing. Now, do you want me to make sure that I make a clip of this last piece of it and send it to him? That's great.
That's hilarious.
That is wonderful. I will do that. Actually, you'll have to tell me his email address or something like the where to send that. That's great. That's just awesome. Well, I'd just like to thank you, Heather, for joining me today and joining us today on this episode of Off the Rak. And I'd like to thank everybody that has tuned in to make the decision to join today. Hopefully you got something out of it. And I'd like you all to, keep an eye out for future Off the Rak interviews, and check out my LinkedIn newsletter, Off the Rak Plus, where you can find previous episodes, resources, transcripts, and more. Next month, we're going to have Susan Packard on, who is the former Chief Operating Officer of HGTV. She'll be back on the show, and you're not going to want to miss this one. She's terrific. And so until then, I would encourage all of you to be human and to find a way to be a positive influence on the people around you in your life each and every day. And so thank you very much. See you all next month.